Hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of Unpacking Possibility. I'm your host, Traci Stein, as always. I'm so happy to be here with you. I've been thinking about this topic a little bit, and it's not something that you probably haven't thought of, but you may not have thought about it in quite this way. And it's what's the difference between being right, like being right about something, or feeling you are, and deciding whether or not to share it, which is being effective. And I'm going to talk about that and what that means today. Um, because it's something that comes up for every single person, for you, for me. We live in an information age where, in a way, people are more informed than ever, but we're also more misinformed than ever. We have very strong personal opinions. There are a million opportunities um, to get into it with someone we know well, someone we don't know at all. And that's something that often happens online, or someone who's kind of like an online friend, but really, if they're not otherwise a friend, I would say it's not really a friendship. But we're in an era where people feel like they can share things, and they do, to a wider audience than they're often thinking about. Now, I don't mean internet trolls or pundits. I mean your average person like you and me. And, you know, it's very easy to go down a rabbit hole with people or to feel very strongly we're right, and we might be, but to use a lot of mental energy and emotional energy and physical energy and time, all of which are in somewhat limited supply, to try to convince somebody of something that if the hand of God came down and wrote it on a piece of paper and handed it to them, it wouldn't change how they feel. Now, in the current political climate in the United States and elsewhere, really globally, we've seen this more than ever. It's like it's tension on steroids. So there's definitely that. So this certainly applies to those situations where we want to share something about what we know in our hearts to believe is the right thing and what we believe is the wrong thing. And where we, of course, feel like there's so much at stake, we want to convince other people. And I'm not saying, by the way, in this podcast, my disclaimer is that I'm not telling you you should or shouldn't do anything. This is just food for thought, as most of the things I'm going to share with you will be. But even in our interpersonal, day-to-day interactions with people, and actually, especially in those interactions, especially when we have so much tension that's so close to the surface anyway, we can get really invested in digging our heels in or making sure we have the last word or making a point. And I'm going to say sometimes being effective means making a decision that you make regardless of whether you actually are right. And you might know for a fact you are. It might be more than opinion. You might be the premier researcher on a topic. And if that's you, chances are you're more likely to be right and well informed about that topic, right? Um, but most people will have an opinion that is at least somewhat based more on what they believe or what's important to them, and not 100% on some sort of objective evidence. Let me get to the point. So, some of you may have heard of the psychologist Marsha Linehan. She's famous in certain circles because she created dialectical behavior therapy, DBT for short. If you want to learn more about this, I had a podcast interview last year and on this very topic with an expert in the field. So that's worth checking out. But one of the many things that makes DBT so effective, not only for people who have a particular set of challenges, but for all of us, is that they're skills for life. And when you hear about them, you think, oh God, how did I not think of it that way until this moment? And one of those things, one of those kind of principles or important things to keep in mind is being right versus being effective. And you can be right and know that you're correct and decide it isn't worth your time and energy to try to convince someone or get the last word in. And it can be an art knowing the difference. So, tonight, what I want to do is talk about some things that can help you make that decision moment to moment. Um, I'm not really even talking about big things happening on the national stage. Those are important things too. I'm talking about things where it's a day to day interaction at work, at home, in the supermarket line, and you have a strong feeling that you are right and someone else is wrong. To what extent do you want to use your energy to try and get that point across? And now you'll have these things in your back pocket to consider next time the situation comes up where you feel like, I'm going to give that person a piece of my mind. Sometimes you'll decide you will, sometimes you'll decide you won't. So, um, let's see, I have some everyday examples. So let's just think somebody cuts you off in traffic, right? And that's yesterday. And you may still be thinking about it today. If you know the person, maybe you do want to call them up and give them a piece of your mind. Or maybe you don't, because it's not worth it. I don't know. Or someone in front of you in the express lane at the supermarket has 30 items and they're only entitled to have 15. You would be absolutely correct that they shouldn't be in that line. And it's up to you whether you want to make a point about that. And some of it's going to depend on what you think the likely outcome is going to be, right? And, the risk benefit analysis you do in the moment. And some of it's going to be on what's the personal cost to you, again, in terms of your time and energy and emotional energy and physical energy. Um, Maybe you have feelings about the person who took credit for your work at a job 30 years ago. And it sounds a little bit, funny to bring something like that up, but almost everybody's had something where it's become emblematic for them. It's like, God, if I ever had the opportunity to set someone right then, I would now do it. Right? When we're younger, when we're not as confident, when we don't have as much life experience, sometimes we choose to let something go because we just don't know how to manage it then. And I think a lot of people who are struggling with, do I use my voice in this situation, can be people who maybe in their own lives have not felt like they've had a voice. And there are lots of reasons for that as well, both on a larger scale and even just a very narrow interpersonal familial kind of scale. So some people were never permitted to give anybody a piece of their minds, right? If you've grown up in a chaotic family, you may not have been permitted to express certain things. Or if you grew up in a really authoritarian household, you may have heard children should be seen and not heard. That's maybe less common now, but not that long ago, it wasn't uncommon. So it can make us feel very conflicted about when we should speak up. And there are times when we should absolutely speak up. But you've probably met people who can't let anything go. It could be, you're planning a neighborhood lunch and it's what color are the napkins going to be? And you hate chartreuse. And there's never been a chartreuse napkin at this, 20-year traditional event. And you may really want to double down on that. Or you may be like, you know what? Let the person who picks chartreuse be the one who gets the praise or the criticism for picking a color that nobody else liked. It's a dopey example, but it's as benign and everyday as I can think of, right? Um, I'm going to give you an anecdote about something else. So, like, it must be 8 years plus ago, I was at a family event and the partner of a relative just had very different beliefs about what is going on in the world than I do. Okay. And this person, used to like to kind of poke the bee's nest. And everybody's got a different style, and I'm sure I've been that person at different points too. It's not the end of the world, but they would always kind of look to kind of sneak in a little snide comment or kind of try and get a reaction out of me. And I used to feel before some of these events like, oh man, like I have to prepare because I want to not have to take this again because I just want to go see people for 2 hours and go home. But I don't want to be someone who's then getting into it with this other person. Anyway, went to another holiday. It happened again. It was probably like the fourth time. And just trying to come from a place of not being so angry and just seeing the humanity in both of us, I said, listen, I'm happy to respond to what you just said. But given that you know that we are coming from different places, I want to ask you before I respond, is there anything at all I could say that would change your mind? And this person thought for a minute and then said, honestly, no. And I said, you know what? I didn't think so. I kind of feel the same way at this point. Maybe we should just, I'm sure we can find something else to talk about. And it was a little bit awkward at first, but I have to tell you, from that moment on, I think instead of that person seeing me and me seeing that person as, one of them, it was just, I think we developed an appreciation for each other, for all of the other qualities and things that were important to us. And we actually had some values in common as well. So that's one way of handling something. And that kind of leads me into maybe the first thing is if you give this person a piece of your mind, if you know you're right or you believe you're right and you decide you are going to lay it down for somebody, do you believe you will change their mind? Like, in other words, will they be able to receive thoughtfully whatever it is you're going to say? And what is it that you feel you need to be the outcome? So, do you need them to come around to your point of view? Or do you need them to apologize? Or do you need them to feel bad about something they did or said? Right? So, what is it that you want? I think it's important to stop and be clear on that because a lot of times when we're feeling a lot of emotion, we don't necessarily know what it is we want, or maybe we kind of do. Um, but what is likely? And will it be worth it, whatever unfolds, if the person doesn't produce the response you're hoping for, either on a feeling level or at a verbal level or through some behavior change? Will it still be worth it? And then a related question would be like, what is the cost of my sharing this with a person who may not do or feel anything differently? I have to tell you, it's almost impossible to talk about this without thinking about the larger political situation. Um, it's so hard. This has strained so many relationships, so many friendships. Um, you know, like everyone, I see things online and I have fantasies about, oh, wanting to just respond or wanting to talk to people and say, is this okay with you? But I know for a lot of the people in my life, they're not on one end of the good person or bad person spectrum. Like most people, they're somewhere in the semi fluid middle. And, they're having strong opinions about me, probably, and my choices. And so, even though I think the current times have changed relationships and strained relationships and forced us to try to see what is it that we may have in common, and what do I think is the essence of this person? For me, it's like, what is this person's intention? But it also has required me, and I'm sure everybody else, to compartmentalize in a way. In other words, to create little mental boxes for the stuff that's hard to sit with so that we can engage with the stuff that is easier to sit with, the things that help us to connect to a person. Um, so in the cost benefit analysis, if the person is not able or not likely able to receive something you have to say, and that is okay with you, then what is the benefit? And the benefit sometimes is going to be just expressing how you feel and getting something off your chest and discharging your own emotion. And if that's the primary goal, and you're okay with the other possible outcomes, including somebody being unhappy or saying, I can't feel as close to you, I would say then that's up to you to decide if it's worth it. And you know what? Sometimes it is. But sometimes you may decide, you know what? If this person can't receive what I feel the need to correct them about or share with them or what I feel right about, your version, and it always comes down to what you feel is effective, may be, based on your goals, it may be to preserve the relationship, whatever it is, understanding that it may have changed also because of this. And it may be to compartmentalize and put this other thing on the shelf. And certain things we can put on a shelf and certain things we just can't put on a shelf, right? It's up to you. Again, don't, I wouldn't even want the responsibility for telling other people the way it always has to be because it's not that simple, right? You know, if somebody is, another question would be, is there a significant moral thing on the line, right? What are the stakes? If you cannot move forward in a relationship without communicating how important something is to you, it may be worth once communicating it and seeing what happens. Sometimes people surprise us. And what I'm saying is the issue at hand, the thing you feel so strongly about may be so important that you are going to conclude that even if the relationship cannot continue after this discussion, I feel so strongly this is such a moral imperative that it is worth taking that risk. And again, that's just looking at the risk and benefit ratio, what it is for you with a given person. Sometimes the costs won't be as obvious to us. Again, I mentioned social media before. Now, again, who hasn't seen people posting stuff that we find inflammatory? And again, there are people who are very dear to me who post things or who hint at things that to me are wrong. And I'm going to say it's not a question to me whether I think it's wrong. I may actually think it's wrong. They may actually adamantly disagree with something that I may allude to or share. I'm trying to share a lot less of that, as close to zero as possible online, because if I ask myself the question, is this likely to change anyone's opinion to what I think is better, societally better, or better for them? The answer is probably no, right? And I, like most people, have posted things in the past, not the recent past, where I just thought, I feel so strongly this is such a moral issue, I'm going to share it. And you know what? I doubt it changed one person's mind. That does not mean you shouldn't share stuff. But I'm thinking of people that I have unfollowed, unfriended more rarely. Yeah, there's a lot going on right now. There's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot going on everything from the world stage to the broader interpersonal stage of like social media to things going on in our very intimate lives. Friends, neighbors, family members, maybe even with your partner, and so forth. Um, I'm trying to think, like, again, if you feel like you need to set the record straight and it's something that's really on your mind and you feel like it's worth it, then you should do it. But again, there are things you can think about to help you make a decision about whether it's worth it, right? Because sometimes we share things and then the outcome is so disappointing, and that creates its own kind of stress. So, another thing to keep in mind as we're thinking about is this worth, the energy it's going to take to share something. Will we be effective or simply be right? And sometimes it's right in quotes. Will there be serious consequences to you or to someone else if you don't set the record straight, if you don't speak up? That makes it a lot more clear that it's time to speak up. At least to me, it does. So, here's an example that's maybe less emotionally charged, although sometimes not that easy. You're at the doctor's office, either for yourself or for a loved one. And whoever is seeing you, maybe it's a busy practice, maybe it's somebody other than your regular person, or maybe you don't really have a regular person, and somebody's quickly going down your list of symptoms or the list of treatments that you've tried. And maybe they're trying to schedule a procedure or something or prescribe a medication based on that. And there's something that they've left out and it's important. And it could possibly change the course of your treatment. There's a medication that maybe you've noted and they don't have in their notes, or they get a detail wrong. And that detail may change whether you do have a surgery or not, or whether you do try a certain medication or not. And sometimes when somebody else is in a rush or they're an authority figure, especially if you've been socialized to not speak up around authority figures, and that's a lot of people, it can generate a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry about the consequences if you interrupt somebody or if you say something. And, there are people out there, there are people in every profession, right? And human beings vary person to person. And some people, regardless of whether they're in a helping relationship with you or not, don't have a great personality. Or they don't do well when you interject, or they don't take feedback well. And what I would say is if it's something that would be a serious consequence, like it would affect your care or the care of somebody you love, it doesn't matter. The consequence is worse for not saying something than saying something, even if it means you piss off your provider, even if it means that you wind up now, oh crap, I'm going to have to change providers, right? Because they want me to do this thing and they're not listening that there's this other thing going on that might be an issue too, or whatever it is. Where you feel like somebody's disrespectful and maybe you're going to speak up and maybe you'll speak up just by changing providers. And listen, this could be your healthcare provider, it could be your mechanic. And you feel like, oh, they're not listening to what I'm saying and I'm not sure that I'm getting, the service at the level that I need to be safe or to have the job done well. Right. And it's going to cost me, or it might even be a safety issue, whatever it is. Then, of course, speaking up is worth regardless how the other person takes it, right? But you have to be willing then to make another big decision sometimes. So that's another way the risk benefit analysis comes into play. And some of you will say, well, duh, of course I would do that. But you would be surprised at how many people are raised to be polite or obedient to authority to the point that they will choose their own suffering over speaking out against someone that they feel um, won't be receptive. That can happen in your place of work. You could be a student, and that could be what it feels like to deal with one of your teachers. And it can put you in a very awkward or uncomfortable or sometimes precarious position. But if the risks to you are great enough, it's worth maybe taking the risk of speaking up. Okay, not everything is going to be life and death, but some things have serious consequences, and I just wanted to point that out. I would say another way to ask yourself, is it worth my being right, or is it more effective to not say something? Would be, again, what is the motivation? If I'm going to go engage in something, is it more for me to discharge energy than to achieve any sort of constructive end, right? Where it's more that I don't care if the other person is offended. The only reason for me to share this is because I'm so angry. Sometimes that might be the thing that really does feel like the most important thing. And other times it might be something where it's worth taking a few moments to go take a breather, or waiting a day if you can, or a week, right? I would think a few times before deciding whether I want to share something with someone who's not receptive. And same thing goes for sharing things online. We share things, we tell it like it is, or try and indirectly let people know stuff online that we might not even feel like we could say to them face to face. Generally, my thought is, cost with somebody reading something that maybe you should tell them directly is usually greater than it's worth to get that release. People can feel temporarily empowered doing that. And again, it's not about wrong or right. People have a right to express themselves, and you may still feel like it's worth it. I think a lot of times we post stuff, and everybody's been guilty of it. I myself have as well, where we forget how many people will see the thing that feels so important for us to get off our chests, you know, a year from now, or just maybe all the people that that thing will be shared with that we're not anticipating. So again, cost benefit analysis. Is it worth it? And it may be, it may not be. What else? What else do I want to share? Some people are just wired that even if they say nice things to you and pretend to care about what you think, might even tell you they do, by their actions, and usually it's repeated actions, they'll have shown you that they don't really care, or that they can't change, because no matter what, even if they're sorry in the moment, you know, they keep doing the same thing. I'm thinking like somebody who has a partner who's a serial cheater. It is worth it telling them how you feel and being as frank as you decide to be. And you may decide you want to do that however many times, but after a while, it's probably worth being effective in a different way. And that's either deciding that it's fine for you or fine enough, or it's a deal breaker and you're going to move on. But I think explaining things and sharing your 2 cents with people who have heard it before and nothing's changed, to me, that's not worth the use of energy, right? Because you know it won't yield the result you want. Um, People who say the right thing but have shown themselves to be really toxic. That's another thing where I would limit how often I want to set somebody straight. Because at that point, the most effective thing probably isn't to use your energy to do that. Just as an aside, I wrote a blog post for Psychology Today a few years ago now, and it's still one of my most popular blogs ever. I, I think it's in the hundreds of thousands of views last time I looked, and I probably haven't looked for a few years. But it was a blog on the dark tetrad, which is the name given by psychology researchers to a group of personalities that have certain things in common. So, psychopaths, narcissists, sadists, and Machiavellians. And Machiavellians, just think of people who like to manipulate people for the sake of doing it. Now, most people, you know, most people can be not great sometimes, but you'll know if you're dealing with one of these types because it's a consistent and harmful pattern of being in the world and relating. And they are usually very good at presenting like, quote, normal people. And the thing is, these people look like normal people because they're people. right? If you're expecting them to look like Boris and Natasha from the old cartoon, where they're, have the arched eyebrows and, sinister facial expressions, you know, the people who are really skilled at being toxic are the people who can present really well most of the time or a lot of the time. And they're in every walk of life. They're in every role in families. It's not like, again, they're not a cartoon villain in terms of how they'll present. So you will know. It's like, I'm trying to think of somebody. It's like the friend who has cheated with your partner. And once is bad enough. If it's happened more than once or with more than one partner, I would say that that's a version of a toxic person. Or even somebody who's just, you tell them you like somebody and they immediately become interested in that person, and it's happened again and again. I would look for patterns. Or the person who has taken money from you, and then come up with a good reason for it, done something underhanded and honestly with the intention to harm you or with the deliberate disregard for your well-being, right? I'm not talking about something that's misguided and it's worth having a conversation with somebody. Everybody does things that they could do differently and should. I'm talking about where there's no opportunity for learning to take place. Somebody who's sadistic is going to enjoy your suffering. Somebody who's Machiavellian is going to enjoy manipulating you. And narcissists, no one even matters except in terms of how they can benefit that person. And same with psychopaths. Psychopaths they're not going to care at all. Everyone's a means to an end. And there's overlap among the traits in those different categories. They're not these distinctly separate, perfectly independent things. So what I spend a lot of time explaining something to someone who has shown me again and again that they're toxic, you don't even need to know what category they might fall into. You just have to know that they've treated you badly repeatedly, or they treat other people badly, and they don't seem to have a sense of conscience. I wouldn't bother using my energy setting them straight because nothing's going to change. I would use my energy to move on. That's a little bit of a digression, but let's see. Life is short, though. Decide where you want to put your energy, right? Here's another thing. People who just don't understand where you're coming from, and even if you explained it 200 different ways, it would just be so outside of their idea of normal or right, or their understanding or approach to life, right? That you're going to make no progress. And you get to decide what you're willing to tolerate and what you don't. But sometimes it's a generational gap. Sometimes it's some other type of gap, a knowledge gap, whatever it is. Again, if it's not going to really yield something and it's just going to introduce more tension into a relationship that you may want to keep some version of, maybe it wouldn't be that effective to share your last thought on things. So I'm gonna share a little disclosure. So whenever I go out to dinner with my family, my mother, who is nearing 80, orders like 5 times the amount of food that we could possibly eat. And people will probably think I am awful when I share my reaction to this, but we'll be at a table and it'll be the 4, my parents and my husband and myself maybe, or whatever group of people. And if there's 4 people, it'll be like, "Oh, let's order these 4 or 5 appetizers and then maybe 6 and these 4 entrees, and let's get a few desserts, and, oh, you should definitely have this." And you can say 10 different ways, "I actually don't want that," or "I think it's kind of too much," and maybe the food barely fits on the table. Now, that's something that I find really irritating, and I'm just admitting it because I don't like having the table crowded with stuff, and I don't like wasting food. And, If she orders a bunch of fish things, she knows I'm not gonna try them, I don't want them, and it's too much food and it's gonna get thrown out. Just because not everybody's gonna eat everything. It's impossible. You know how it is. If it's something, like, that isn't gonna keep till the next day or much longer, it just seems like a waste. So that's my take on it. My feeling is, it's a restaurant. We can come back another time and try something different. We don't need to get everything we've ever wanted. And so every time we would go out to a restaurant and she would go through the same thing, and it's not even about the bill. It's just about, like, it feels like, oh, we're ordering a zillion things. We don't need them. I hate throwing food out. And again, I feel like food that she knows I'm not going to eat anyway is going to get pushed on me for no reason. So, and I realize how awful I sound saying this because who cares, right? But it's always different when it's your inner circle or your family. We're so good at pushing each other's buttons. And I used to kind of explain, we can come back next week and try something different. But my mother grew up where there were times when they were food insecure. Now, food was always on the table somehow, but sometimes that was trying to feed a family of 6 and whoever else might come over with beans and some pasta, and that's it. So if they had meat, it was because it was a time when things were flush, and a lot of times things weren't, and money was extremely tight. And so for my mother, it's not just the excitement of being to try different things, which she likes having that variety, and she said that, but it's also that she can now have things and not worry that there won't be enough food. But I think she will always worry that there won't be enough food. Not only if people are coming over, do you have enough? But I think there's some deep-seated fear that there won't be enough at some point. And who knows? Um, but it's so interesting because if it was somebody else and not my own family member, I probably would have had a lot more patience. At this point, it's taken a little while. If you ask me, do I want it? I'm going to say no. No, I'm fine. Because especially if it's something I don't like or don't want. But I figure for this 2 hours that we're out, or 3 hours or whatever, if you want to get 6 appetizers, okay. And again, I don't love it. I don't have to love it. But being effective means choosing something that isn't a big deal in the grand scheme of things, even if I think I'm right. And I do think I'm right, but she thinks she's right. And at this point, I just want to let her enjoy her meal. So, and my father can complain that she's going to throw half of it out and I'll let them duke it out. I don't have to actually weigh in on every single thing or manage every single thing, even if I might feel like I do. So there you go. You can please feel free to at me in the comments. I know it sounds bad. But that leads me to another way we can decide, okay, is it worth this thing that I'm taking a stand on or I want to take a stand on that I feel right about? At the end of the day, how important is it to me? If I don't say something and it's not a big deal, I'm not talking again about something where you really have a moral imperative to say something and you'll know what that is for you. I'm talking about, like, in a week, are you still going to be thinking about this thing and feeling like, I wish I had set this person right? In a month, in a year, in 10 years, is it going to still be a big deal? Now, earlier in the podcast, I referenced some things that might be, right? Maybe you wished at some point you stood up for yourself. And maybe years later, it's become emblematic of a thing that you needed to experience growth around. And maybe generally now you would feel more confident and you would find your voice and you would stand up for yourself earlier, right? Or maybe, you are at a meeting at work and you came up with the idea for something and somebody presents it as if it's theirs, maybe you would say something. Now, I don't know if it's worth calling up the person from 30 years ago and tracking them down. It probably isn't. But maybe it also teaches you about being fair and not being like that person. I'll give you another example. I remember being a student and feeling so disempowered and wishing I had been able or felt able to speak up for myself, right? You might have 20 good teachers and two horrible ones, but the two horrible ones can be scarring. So, those are things that come into our lives and are part of our path because we're supposed to learn something from it. Now, I'm going to tell you, when I was in a position of teaching, I never forgot how it felt to have somebody talk to me like I didn't matter or to be dismissive or devaluing. And I know that's their stuff, um, because I think there's more than one way to address something in any situation. And to be honest, I've had students that I thought were terrific and the students that I thought were, trying hard, but maybe didn't quite grasp everything right away. And I've had a handful of students that I thought were not great. And instead of being frustrated with those students and letting them feel bad, I decided I wanted to commit to trying to help them understand. And because that was part of my job, right? It's not only on them to come and learn something, but for me to learn how to help them learn, right? And I'm not always going to get it right either. And that's what I would have wanted in some of the situations I experienced. So sometimes being effective means that later on, you have the opportunity to do the thing in the way that you think is, the kindest or most ethical or most compassionate or effective way, even though you're not going to change what somebody else has decided to do, right? We're all always hopefully learning and growing in different ways. So, you know, would I bother writing a letter to somebody I think did a crappy job, years ago? For me, I'm choosing not to. I'm choosing to say, I don't want to be like that person. Right. And if I chose to write a letter, great. Not a wrong decision, just a different one than I made. Maybe it's journaling about it to get something off your chest. You get to choose. And that's really the point I'm trying to make. Um, so, yeah, I think that's about it. You know, on your deathbed, are you going to feel like you should have said something? If you're answering that question, yes, that it's so important, then it's worth speaking up about something. If it's just going to aggravate you and it's not likely to move the needle, you may want to decide to channel your energy elsewhere. I don't mean suck it up. I mean decide to channel that energy elsewhere rather than spending it on people who just aren't going to meet you where you feel you need and want them to. So that's just what I wanted to share. Again, you get to decide what being right versus being effective means for you and when those two will be the exact same thing. But as always, I hope this is helpful. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. If you enjoy the episode or find the content helpful, please do like, share, follow, tell a friend, and let me know what you'd like to hear more about. I really do want this to be useful for you. Um, so until next time, as always, please know that I wish you all the very best. Be well.